Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the best Sonic game ever made. Yeah, let's start controversial with an opinion. That's not going to upset anyone. Well, if you found my channel amongst the masses of Sonic content on YouTube, hi there. Chances are you're pretty familiar with this title, you played it, you've seen the memes, and if not, well, maybe this video might be more helpful for you. Over the years we've seen so many retro games ported to newer systems to keep new audiences in the know, and to get that dollar. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is definitely no exception, albeit it's been a while for this one. The question of which version of Sonic 3 is the best to play is pretty loaded. Each version of Sonic 3 and Knuckles has its own quirks, and in some instances, especially for a Brit like me, some real pitfalls. Region definitely plays a part. So we've got some ports, we've got some nitpicks, and we've got some and Knuckles. Let's go! So let's start with original hardware. We've got a lovely 2 lock-on cartridges stacked. What could be better? But wait a minute, this is a modded system. So let's show you a bit of a comparison here. Yeah, that's right, everyone's favourite thing, 50Hz. For those unfamiliar, it's effectively the different refresh rate that we had in PAL territories to NTSC territories. It resulted in slowdown and squash screens. Some PAL versions of games did get optimised for the different frequency and the different frame rates, and I think Sonic 3 and Knuckles had some optimisation, at least compared to Sonic 1, but it's definitely not a one-to-one recreation. This could, however, just be a placebo effect from the music being optimised. Sonic definitely feels heavier, and it takes longer to get his momentum up. It's something that, when I was growing up, didn't really bother me because I had no point of reference. I just thought, oh, Sonic's not really that fast, what's with the reputation? But, now I know. When I went back to play this version for recording, I definitely didn't mind playing it this way. It's still serviceable, but I'd rather play in 60Hz. Thankfully I've got a modded system like I mentioned, but the problem is, that's not really very helpful for you guys, is it? So if you want to get a modded system, you either need to know how to install the Switch or Switchless mod, which I'll leave a link to in the description for more information, but you do need to have intermediate electronics knowledge and intermediate soldering skills. I don't have any of those, so I bought this pre-modded. Luckily a local retro game shop had it in stock, so I was able to scoop it up. Another option if you want to play original hardware at full speed is you could get an NTSC console, but that's a hassle as well. I don't know what it is, but there's just something intangibly nicer about using original hardware compared to an unofficial emulator for, say, a Raspberry Pi or PC. As great as those options are, and as much as I advocate that they're a good thing. Also, if you have a decent flash card, then there's perhaps an even better option that we'll get to later in the video for playing on original hardware. Of course, if you prefer to avoid the rigmarole of getting original hardware to run at full speed, we've got some more options coming up for you. The Sonic & Knuckles collection released exclusively for Windows PC and is a port from the ground up. You'll see that a lot of re-releases of classic Sonic titles work through emulation, so getting a dedicated port is something special. I'd imagine this release was done this way due to emulation not being quite at the standard they'd like at the time. It's weird to imagine a time where SEGA actually had quality control. I didn't follow emulation back then, so I can't say if that's the reason. Let me know if you have any info about the state of Mega Drive emulation back in 1997 in the comments. To get this release to work on my Windows 10 PC, I used a tool called SEGA PC Reloaded, made by a programmer who goes by the pseudonym Karama. There's a link to the Sonic Retro forum thread in the description. Karama did great work. For my initial playthrough and recording, I left the SEGA PC Reloaded utility on the default settings to get as close to the original version as I could get, but I think he may have fixed a few issues and had some pellet blending in place, so, you know, there might be a few different things outside of what was originally stock with this version. But hey, that's only a good thing, right? Right away I was able to use my 8-bit DOE Mega Drive controller over USB, which was a nice surprise. When I started the first time, the title screen had no delay, which was a surprise, and I thought I'd installed it incorrectly. Also, the soundtrack was way different. The faster title screen and different music was a bit jarring, but once I started, the actual gameplay felt pretty much one-to-one with the Mega Drive version. Everything felt responsive, and scrolled and performed correctly. This is also the first time that we in the UK got to experience an official release of Sonic 3 and Knuckles at full speed, thanks to PC monitors not having the whole 50Hz issue. They were more uniform with their US counterparts in that respect. The music though, Okay, so with this being a port, the Mega Drive sound trip being hard to mimic, PC sound hardware being hit and miss back then, and standardised compressed music formats like MP3 being a ways off, the development team ended up having to remake the soundtrack to make it work. On this release by default, you have two options, MIDI or FM. To my knowledge, MIDI is the generic option that you would use if you didn't have specialised sound hardware at the time. FM required a sound card compatible with something called ADLIB. I'll admit, by the time I got into PC gaming, the need for a dedicated sound card was not really there anymore, so my knowledge is limited. But basically, back when this game came out, some games needed a dedicated sound card to get the best sound out of the game. Sonic CD and Sonic R never had this problem on PC, as the audio was CD Redbook, so the CD drive decoded the audio. I've heard LGR talk about ADLIB a bit, so I'm picking this up from his videos and context. I was able to use the FM Synth option on my playthrough. I can't tell if my personal bias for the Mega Drive sound chip played a part, but it didn't feel right with the soundtrack. The way the instruments work on this made some tracks sound like Christmas remixes to me, kind of like a sort of jingly sort of thing going on. I checked out some of the MIDI version, and they sounded not too dissimilar from the FM variants, but flatter and missing some notes. Another difference in the sound is the compositions from Carnival Night, Ice Cap, and Launch Space Zones. They differ outright from their Mega Drive counterparts. The consensus online is that these were the original compositions intended for the Mega Drive version before Michael Jackson got involved and composed the themes that we came to know for these levels. Of course, with these working on an FM synthesizer all through MIDI, rather than through the Mega Drive sound chip, there are some differences from their original sound in that regard. I prefer the Mega Drive versions personally, but I could be nostalgia influenced, so bear that in mind. In terms of sound effects, everything sounded pretty similar, but I'm not particularly an audiophile, so take that with a pinch of salt. Visually, all of the levels still look as they do on the Mega Drive. The special stages, however, seem to have a weird glitch scrolling effect. I don't know whether this is an issue with how it's running on current hardware as opposed to what it would have run on back on Windows 98, or whether it's some kind of weird 3D issue. The game supported DirectX on its release, at least I assume by the included DirectX 3 installer on disk, but maybe the hardware at the time couldn't handle the pseudo 3D sprites properly, which translates to how this port runs now. It's really odd, and I don't like it. It can give you a real headache for prolonged periods. I don't know how I managed to get all of the emeralds on this, and even a couple of super emeralds. By default, I wouldn't recommend this release. While the levels handle fine, I don't like how the music sounds whether by MIDI or FM, and I don't like how the special stages look. Thanks to the fanbase, however, this is a very nice port to own. I've mentioned SEGA PC Reloaded by Kurama, which does a great job of bringing its current systems, and works to make it run in full screen with the correct aspect ratio, and has some features like palette blending to smooth it out as much as possible. But there are some other utilities that work in conjunction with this tool to make it go that step further. SMPS Player is another utility by coders Main Memory and Valley Bell that allows you to put the original Mega Drive versions of the level themes back into the game. It's very customizable too, with the option to switch between Sonic 3 or Sonic and Knuckles' different themes for mini-bosses and extra lives, and you can even get some Sonic 1 and 2 themes to choose from. We're not quite done yet, as I found a Sonic Retro forum post by Main Memory with another utility called SKC Mod Loader. Not only does this make installing mods to this game much easier, but it has SMPS Player built in, several cheats to choose from, and a palette fix that fixes the special stages. Thanks to the work of these clever modders, Sonic & Knuckles Collection is definitely one of my favourite ways to play this game. Thanks to the fact it's a port rather than emulation, any emulation-based input lag, as slight and probably unnoticeable as it may be, is definitely not present. It's customizable, runs beautifully, and looks and sounds as I'd like it to. Currently, this is only available on the used market as of recording this video, and I don't see that changing. The original jewel case version was about £15 on eBay last I checked, and I once saw the full big box version listed for £40, but the DVD case re-released by Explosive goes for about £1 to £5 typically, so that's pretty cheap. It's a version I could happily recommend thanks to these mods, but I would not recommend playing the vanilla version. I think the technical issues are more down to it being a product of its time rather than poor development, so I can't be too mad about it. PC gaming was a real mixed bag back then. It feels like effort was put into this. Again, I also like it for introducing full-speed Sonic 3 and Knuckles to us Brits, and the mods make it one of my favourite ways to play. There are links to the mods in the video description if you would like to check them out. Sonic Jam released exclusively for the SEGA SATURN in the same year as the Sonic & Knuckles collection, and just like SKC, it's another port, not emulation. We were spoiled rotten. My experience with this one is fairly brief. Back in 2005 I'd finished school and was earning a bit of cash, and I got super into retro collecting as it was way cheaper back then. A lot of that stash has been sold since, and I keep my collection much more reserved these days. Part of that stash was a Model 2 SEGA SATURN, and a collection of titles including Sonic Jam, which itself is a collection of titles. Sonic Jam is a compilation of Sonic 1, 2, 3 and Knuckles, and all of the associated lock-on cartridge games. With the nature of optical media being slower than cartridges, especially back then, there are a couple of instances where there are slight delays for things like sound effects or levels loading, but we're talking about milliseconds to seconds, so it's nothing that should bother you. The music to me sounds one-to-one with the Mega Drive original, so I guess it goes to show that when Sega work with their own hardware, they can do great things. What is weird, however, is while the PC versions seem to get different music but the same sound effects, this version seems to have different sound effects but the same music. I'm not sure whether this was a technical issue or a creative decision, but generally the altered sound effects don't really bother me. Sonic Jam also adds alternative level layouts through the normal and easy modes, as well as the option to play the original mode. The level layouts changed, and in easy mode in particular, whole acts are cut out of your run. This is kind of neat for people who have played this game a lot and either fancy a change of the familiar level layouts they already know, or just want to stick it on easy for a quick run through. The only thing with this release is, if you're in the PAL territory, then it is limited to 50Hz, so yeah, kinda stuck with that. The other thing as well is, on the used market, it's not exactly the cheapest of releases of this game, and you're having to get a SEGA SATURN, which, let's be honest, the optical drives on those things are dying out left, right and centre. Due to the fact that it's only available on the used market, it's only available for dying hardware, and it's not the cheapest of versions, I can't really recommend this version, but it's a very interesting release. This is Sonic Mega Collection Plus for the PlayStation 2, Xbox and PC. Guess what? We got stiffed with 50Hz. By this point we were in the 6th generation of home consoles, and Dreamcast had already brought us 60Hz and even progressive scan through VGA. PlayStation 2, GameCube and Xbox all had progressive scan modes through component cables. Even our standard CRT TVs could swap between 50Hz and 60Hz, even through composite. So why was this release only 50Hz? I mean, this was 2004. With Sonic Jam it was different, everything was 50Hz, but by this point 60Hz options were a standard feature. Even prior SEGA releases had these. It gets better, well worse really. The emulation on this version has some bad slowdown. I played this back to back with my Mega Drive copy on 50Hz mode to compare, and there was considerable noticeable difference. The music and sound effects definitely sound compressed to me too. This is on a DVD, so why do we have this issue? To add to the fun, you don't get the lock-on cartridge games from the start. To unlock Sonic 3 and Knuckles, you have to play Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles 20 times each. Oh, you know what? It gets even better. I discovered while I was working on this video that the PAL GameCube Sonic Mega Collection, the non-plus version, supports 60Hz. The emulation is considerably better too, albeit with some sound effect issues here and there. If you want to play Sonic Mega Collection, definitely get the GameCube version. The only caveat with the GameCube release is that save states aren't there, and it doesn't have Comic Zone, the Ooze, or the Game Gear Sonic games, but then it did come before, so, you know, fair play I guess. Sonic 3 and Sonic 3 and Knuckles still support saves just like on the original cartridge release, although you'll need to remember to press the Z button and select save and exit before powering off your system. It still has those stupid hoops to jump through for the lock-on games too. The other thing is, as much as I like the GameCube controller, it is not good for 2D games, so you're going to want to have some kind of controller converter or a third-party controller. Let's talk about the PC version. Some of you may be thinking that surely that would run at 60Hz, right? Well, kind of and kind of not. It feels like it has 50Hz slowdown. Like, picture 50Hz games on the PlayStation Classic running at 60Hz. I'm not sure whether it's bad emulation or whether they actually added in a slowdown to make it feel more like the PAL versions that we might remember, like maybe for nostalgia effect, but I'm not keen on that. Getting the game to work in the first place was a trial in of itself. I had to download a non-official CD crack just to get it to actually start. It wouldn't actually work with the disc in the drive. I mean, eventually I got it to work in windowed mode, but that was a bit awkward. Using the no CD crack, I managed to get it to work in full screen mode, and even then it would be 640 by 480, which my recording software absolutely loved dealing with. And then there's getting a controller to work, so I had to use the Steam configuration tool, and I had to fiddle around with the two different executables because there's a launcher and a game executable. And you can't just launch the game through the game executable, you have to go through the launcher, and you have to set the controller configurations to the game executable, and yeah, it's kind of a joke. Like, you'll get a lot of people on these kind of videos that'll be like, oh, why don't you just use an emulator? And in this instance, with a release like this, I don't blame them. At the time of this game's release, I know for a fact that unofficial emulation was definitely better than what this was providing. I tried to use the game's own configuration tool for configuring the controller, but for some reason it has this weird glitch where it's like you're holding left on the D-pad down constantly even when you're not. It's definitely not an issue with my controller either, as I've not had this issue in any other game. Thankfully, this is the last of the 50Hz releases I'll be covering. I'll just quickly mention though that the now defunct Wii Virtual Console received ports of Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, which ran at 50Hz by the way, just like every other PAL Virtual Console game. Although they did offer lock-on right away if you own the necessary Virtual Console games. Wii Shop Channel was definitely a loss, but not for these releases. So now we've got the Backbone Entertainment version. This is still available for Xbox One through backwards compatibility, and will probably be available for Xbox Series X, provided it doesn't get taken off the Xbox Marketplace of course. It's 60Hz, neat, we got lock-on right away, sort of. You still need to buy Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles separately, but it beats jumping through hoops on Mega Collection though. It plays fairly responsively, has the right sounds. Okay, it looks like we might be onto something here. No, we are not. So check out this menu. This is the replacement for the game's main menu. Here's why this is a problem. The save system that Sonic 3 brought to the series auto-saves at the start of each zone and keeps track of all the emeralds collected. You get several save slots, and you can use this to have multiple playthroughs with each of the characters, Sonic and Tails, Sonic alone, Tails alone, and Knuckles. This save system is gone in this release. You get save states, that's it. Now this might not seem like a big deal, but here's my problem. Once you finish Sonic 3, or Sonic 3 and Knuckles, you get the option to select any level. This is effectively New Game Plus. You can use this to try to get the emeralds you missed, and if you unlocked the super or hyper forms, you can play around in some of the earlier levels of these forms. Wonderful completion bonuses. This grotesque feature-cutting menu gets rid of that for a mere save state system. Are you kidding me? Also, there's an awful looking smudgy filter that's there even with smoothing turned off. This version sucks. Next. Now we have our first official portable release, Sonic Classic Collection for the DS. This version on the surface looks like it should be good. It has the lock-on games and they're unlocked right away. It's the American ROM, so no PAL slowdown. Emphasis on PAL. It sucks. I know this footage is of an emulator. I assure you, I've tried this release on my 3DS, and these performance issues, graphical glitches, and this weird scrolling effect, they're definitely all present on original hardware. This release uses the Mega Drive's original resolution, but crops it to account for the DS's lower screen resolution, and that's why we have this weird scrolling effect as we're running along. I get there's difficulty converting a game from a system with high resolution. Here's where I have an issue. Nintendo released a competent port of the Super Nintendo 16-bit Super Mario World on the Game Boy Advance several years prior. I don't think that they should have released this mess in the first place. Sega dropped the ball on this completely. And then finally, brought to us by D3T, we've got the Steam version. If you played the Sega Mega Drive Classics collection for the Switch, PS4 or Xbox One, then you're familiar with their work. Before this compilation was released to consoles, D3T released several Mega Drive games on Steam that can be bought separately or in a bundle deal, and this release was where the bedroom main menu interface was introduced, which is a pretty neat little novelty, I guess. The emulation itself is passable. It's nothing beyond what you would get on an unofficial emulator. You've got your rewind, fast forward, quick save and load, some visual filters and borders. It runs at full speed, so far this is probably the best re-release, but I can't find much enthusiasm for it, or at least not as it is on its own. To be honest, so far the best we have from official re-releases with no fan involvement is a basic unencrypted ROM in a passable emulator and not much else. I mean, this is the pinnacle of the series from back when the franchise was a system seller, and this is the best official re-release that we have. I don't want to end my coverage of this game on a sour note, because there are some real positives to owning this version, but to be honest, we've got the fandom to thank for that more than anyone else. One handy thing with the Steam release is that if you go into the program files, you can actually copy the ROM file, and it's unencrypted. I've copied all of these ROMs, and in the instances where they use the .68k extension, rename the extension to .bin or .smd so that they're usable on other emulators, and I use them on my modded PSP sometimes. You can then download ROM hacks if you so choose to try it as well. By using a program like Lunar IPS, you can actually insert the hacks into your own legitimate ROMs. You can also do this through the Steam Workshop rather than playing around with the ROM files and patches. One ROM hack I'd like to give special attention to is Sonic 3 Complete. This is effectively Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but with a lot of choices for customization. One thing long-time players might have noticed is that when you played the lock-on game Sonic 3 and Knuckles rather than just Sonic 3 on its own, some of the music such as the 1-up theme or the mini-boss theme changes to the Sonic and Knuckles variants. This Sonic 3 Complete ROM hack actually restores the Sonic 3 music to the complete game. At least if you so choose, you can actually customize that as well. You can also select the prototype pre-Michael Jackson music compositions for Carnival Night, Ice Cap and Launch Base zones, which in my opinion sound way better with the Mega Drive sound chip than on the PC's ADLIB synthesizer in that release. There's also the option to change the stage order to the prototype version of the game from back when Sonic 3 and Knuckles was originally planned to be a single big release that was just Sonic 3. Speaking of levels, you can actually change between the original, easy and normal level layouts just like in Sonic Jam. There is even a dedicated button to activate the super forms now, with the option to cancel out of them too. A very welcome addition indeed. This ROM hack has made me very tempted to finally buy an EverDrive. It's my favourite ROM hack of the series, and it's on my PSP constantly. This is Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited, or just known as Sonic 3 Air. It requires a copy of Sonic 3 and Knuckles on Steam installed to run, however this is effectively just a key. Much like the widely celebrated Christian Whitehead releases of Sonic 1 and 2, this game uses a brand new engine, allowing for native widescreen support with no cropping involved, as well as some collision detection fixes, and even a remastered soundtrack that sounds so clean and crisp. Every level plays and looks just as it should, and this is the least buggy version I've played in this video project. But of course, individual experiences may differ. The special stages play great, and the animation has been improved to be more in line with the Blue Sphere stages from Sonic Mania. There's also a set of achievements which, when conquered, can unlock additional abilities, including but not limited to Sonic's drop dash ability from Sonic Mania. And Knuckles and Tails is another highlight too. Some things have been changed for the better. In the original Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the final Sonic 3 boss fight is cut off, but this release adds old Grabby Hands back in. Okay, maybe that name doesn't sell it well. Of course, some additions from Sonic 3 Complete are included, such as the dedicated Super Form button and the option to cancel out, the Super Peel Out ability, and some soundtrack customization options. There are some instances where I'm not sure if the widescreen is for the better, including this boss from Angel Island Act 1 where it just makes it way too easy because you can just get behind him. Also, a weird thing that they added onto it is the fact that the bomber keeps throwing down bombs at you in Angel Island Act 2. I don't know if it was a developing mistake or whether it was just a case of they wanted to make that bit a bit harder, but it threw me off a bit. Don't get me wrong, these criticisms are just minor nitpicks. For the most part, the quality of life improvements are welcome. Sonic 3 Air is an absolute joy to play, and I couldn't put it down when I was working on this video. I definitely recommend giving it a go. So overall, if you want the best experience out of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, you have a lot of options to choose from, but several to avoid. You might not be so fussy about 50Hz or emulation slowdown, in which case, to be honest, I could happily recommend any version to you outside the GameCube version, and maybe the DS version. Whatever option you go for, even if it's one of the lesser options I was not so kind to, at the core, this game is what I consider to be the opus magnum of the Sonic franchise, and I wholeheartedly encourage you to experience it for yourself. The lore, level design, visuals and soundtrack all culminate in something really special. Thanks for watching everyone, I'll catch you next time.